From the land of Gitchagumi, the pride of the American side, where the gales of November come early, this is Minnesota Unknown.
Each week, we'll take a deep dive into Minnesota's storied past, with a special emphasis on the surprising, the unusual, and little-known history hidden in plain sight. My name is Alex Weston.
I'm Hannah Norton.
I'm Josie Bergman.
And we are Minnesota Unknown.
And today we're going to be talking about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
It's the week of the 50th anniversary of the Edmund Fitzgerald sinking, and we wanted to do a podcast about it because it's a pretty important part of Minnesota history. There's commemorative events all over the state, especially up at Split Rock Lighthouse every year where they light the lighthouse because it's not normally lit, seeing as it is now a historic site. But people by the thousands attend this commemorative event. And so we wanted to kind of give some more context. Most people only probably know the Edmund Fitzgerald from the song.
And by most people, you mean me.
And by most people, I mean Alex. But Hannah, our intrepid explorer, has done a lot of research and is hopefully going to help maybe fix some of the factual errors from the song, because there are things that are apparently incorrect, and also just provide some more context around the ship and kind of its history pre and post sinking.
Yeah, I've brushed up on my mariner side, which is very small.
None of the three of us are maritime experts.
No.
Let
me
tell you.
Put
that disclaimer there.
So, yeah, let me just say, there's nothing that will make you feel less like an expert or more aware of how little you know about boats than trawling through the YouTube comment section of a video about the Edmund Fitzgerald, watching two 50-year sailors duke it out over like the mechanics of the Fitzgerald and the way it sank, and talking about the physics of it all and how many repairs it's had over the years. I mean, there are people who are so well qualified for this, it makes me feel frightened. But I'm going to do my best, and I hopefully will turn up some facts that maybe you guys didn't know. There's definitely some things in here that I didn't know, although, you know, the song is always going to be worth a listen.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy.
So tell us a little bit about the Edmund Fitzgerald itself. Would you describe it as the pride of the American side?
Yeah, well, a lot of people described it as the pride of the American side, and it was not the biggest ship on the Great Lakes, technically. There were some Canadian ships that held that title, but it was the biggest one on the American side.
And as the big freighters go, it was bigger than most.
It was bigger than most. It had been a ship that was built by the Great Lakes Engineering Works and Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. They had signed a contract saying that they were to design and build the largest ship on the Great Lakes. And that happened in 1957. They built this ship. It was a ship that was actually designed, it sounds like, using sort of wartime procedures where it was built in pieces and then assembled, which is really interesting. That was not common. They kind of had some debate over the name initially. They were going to name it for the chairman of the board, Mr. Edmund Fitzgerald. By all accounts, he did not want the ship to be named after him and actually proposed alternatives, but they wound up calling it that. And when it was put into the water, it actually had to be lowered sideways into the water because it was extremely long. It was 729 feet long and 75 feet wide. Basically, the ship was loaded onto kind of almost sliders. So you can picture it being lowered sideways into a canal. And they had to hammer out these holders, basically, that were keeping the ship in place. And then it slid sideways down these ramps and into its dock. It actually went so fast that it actually almost rolled over. And it rolled so far that it hit the opposite side of the canal area that it was sliding into. And there was a man in the audience who had a heart attack and died because he was so frightened by that.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing.
Yeah. So that's how the Edmund Fitzgerald started its journey on the Great Lakes.
A man killer.
Yeah. Well, and it didn't help that it took them 3 tries to smash the champagne bottle when they were christening the ship.
It can't be a good omen.
So if you're superstitious and you're watching this, you're kind of a little bit concerned.
But to be completely rational, it operated a good while before.
Yes, it did.
It operated very well. I mean, it kept breaking its own records of like speed and efficiency in delivering things. It was also apparently a very nice ship.
Mm-hmm.
Like it had guest quarters with
Ooh.
deep pile carpeting.
Right. It was outfitted by J.L. Hudson. It was outfitted very well. It was air conditioned on the inside. It was, one of the sources said, it's fully outfitted in artificial leather. So pleather everywhere. But it was very luxurious. They were saying it was better than what you could get in most hotel rooms at the time. So it actually became, with the company that owned it, it kind of became this perk of being higher up in the company that you could take a little cruise on the Fitz, because they all call it the Fitz.
It was saying like that there were guests on it like weeks before it sank, and that they were running like they had staterooms and like full service.
Yep. Yeah. It was a really
stuff.
nice ship, and it was built to the maximum St. Lawrence Seaway size, which meant that it was the absolute biggest it could be and still fit through all the locks that it needed to fit through.
Ah, that's key. So there is a limit to how big they can make
Yes.
these.
The max was 730 feet long and 75 feet wide. It could carry 26,000 tons. That's what it was rated for, and that's what was allowed to carry. And most often it was carrying iron ore, and often would cover the distance between Minnesota and Toledo.
Tell us, what do we know about the crew and the captain? Gordon Lightfoot says,
With a crew and good captain well seasoned.
yes.
So Ernest McSorley was the captain, and he had been on the seas for a very long time. One of the biographers who wrote a book about the sinking of the Fitzgerald said that he interviewed captains who were rivals with McSorley during his time, and they all admitted he was really, he was the best of the best. There was no one better, and he was very experienced, and he'd been through a lot of storms. He had a really good retention record. They said he was really good at recruiting talent and maintaining it. So people would follow him from ship to ship to be on his crew because they really liked working with him. So he had some people who had been there for a long time, some people who were old sea veterans, and I think the youngest was about 20 years old. There was a crew of 29 on the ship that night. It was all men that were on the ship. It was a big mix of people who were sort of like lifetime sailors who it was kind of in their family. And then they said like the other half of the guys were people who were not wanting to go fight in Vietnam and oftentimes were kind of involved in protests and that side of things. And it's groups of people that usually don't get along very well, but on this ship and in this environment, they really did. I mean, it's an experienced captain and a relatively experienced crew as well. The other thing that I found really interesting was McSorley, his wife was in medical care receiving treatment for cancer. McSorley was going to get a bonus for every voyage that he made past his quota that season. And so he wanted to get that bonus.
He's got bills to pay.
He has medical bills to pay for his wife. One of his sayings was basically like, you don't get paid at anchor. So you don't get paid if you're not traveling.
So at what point before the journey did they know that a storm was coming and still decided to go? Because there's a long history of wrecks and storms.
So this is a ship that's been in the water since the late 50s. And so it had been through a decent amount of damage. It had been refitted. The man who was interviewed in the documentary that I saw, whose uncle went down with the Fitzgerald, he said that when he was sailing on it, he was basically down in one of the long hallways that ran along the length of the ship. And there were sort of like built-in light fixtures along like every few feet or so along that tunnel. And when it would go over a wave, the ship would bend so much that one of those lights would be around the corner and out of view. Yeah. A ship is
and
supposed
that's normal. It's supposed to, or not.
It can be. A ship is supposed to flex. It's like a skyscraper. That's what they'll always say. Like if a ship is too rigid, it's just going to break. So it does need a certain amount of flex. But there's a lot of debate, it seems, as to whether it was supposed to be flexing quite that much. Mm-hmm. And he said he told the captain at that time, and the captain just said, yep, it scares me too.
That's what you want to hear.
So, yeah.
Comforting.
Not, I don't think, very reassuring. But I just thought that was interesting. And just to imagine being on something so large in such a volatile environment, and then you're just walking down the hallway and you literally see the walls bending around you is pretty wild. But I think that also goes to show that sailing sort of gets you used to taking some big risks. And
it's an inherently dangerous profession.
Yes. That was one of his first like early voyages, he said. And so imagine like a lifetime of taking risks like that and feeling like you know where the breaks are and narrow escapes, but you've made it so far. And it's sort of, I think humans can get used to a lot of different elements of danger that maybe the first time it seems terrifying. And then after you've done it 100 times, it's kind of like, well, here we go again. So anyway.
So tell us, what are the actual details of the Edmund Fitzgerald's final voyage? Gordon Lightfoot says it was coming back from some mill in Wisconsin, fully loaded for Cleveland, but neither of those are true.
No. So it was actually leaving from Superior, Wisconsin, which is just right across the harbor from Duluth. So more or less leaving from Duluth, and they were heading to Detroit. And they had a haul of iron ore pellets. The ship was carrying a little bit more than it should have been carrying technically, although it looks like not as much as its record load. So they were carrying a little bit more than perhaps they should have been, but it was not more than they'd done successfully before.
How much were they carrying?
A little over 26,000 tons.
26,116 long tons?
That's how they, yeah.
And then there's a different, in parentheses, it says 29,250 short tons.
But remember, they had been rated for 26,000 long tons.
So they're pushing it.
The record load for the Edmund Fitzgerald is 27,402 long tons.
So they had exceeded what they were carrying the night they sank. They had exceeded by
quite a bit.
A lot. So again, more than perhaps they should have, but not as much as they had.
Now,
before.
how does being heavily loaded or even overloaded affect it in a storm?
Well, I'll get there.
Okay.
So November 9th, 8:30 a.m., they're loaded up with their taconite pellets. So they leave at 2:20 p.m. on the 9th of November, 1975. 2:39 p.m., the National Weather Service issues gale warnings, and those are the gales of November for the area where the Fitzgerald is sailing. And then the captain of the Anderson, which is a ship that is going to play a big role in this story, radios the Edmund Fitzgerald, and the Anderson is not far from the Fitzgerald at all. They're kind of making their voyages somewhat in tandem. So they're close to another ship, and they're in radio contact. At this point, they have two different types of radar. And then they have their radio as well. I mean, it's not great weather, but it's relatively okay at this point.
Well, and the captain had sailed through many a storm. Like, this was not unfamiliar territory to anybody.
No. They've been on the lakes for years and years and years. They know the steely eye of the Witch of November. So the captain of the Anderson is now watching the Fitzgerald round Caribou Island. The captain of the ship watches them go around it and comments that they're closer to the shoal by that island than he would want to be. And there's a little bit of debate over this. There are some people who think that when they took that bend around the island, they may have actually been a little bit off and scraped the bottom of the ship on that shoal and actually taken on some damage there and started to take on water.
Did they have, like, the technology to know how deep the water was?
So they didn't have a fathometer, which is what you use to test the depth. So they would have to literally drop a line to see.
That seems hard to do in the middle of a storm.
Yes. They're also, I mean, it's obvious that McSorley knows that the weather's bad and he's taking measures to kind of mitigate that. So the reason that he goes up and around Caribou Island is it's kind of like at that bend of the lake. And so he's trying to go between Caribou Island and that shore of Lake Superior and kind of shelter over there a little bit, it sounds like. But yeah, I mean, without a way to actually measure the depth in real time, you're going off of a map.
Well, and this is showing, like, navigational charts that they were using were based on surveys from 1916 and 1919. And so they were perhaps
That's a while ago.
Not even the most accurate maps to begin with, partnered with you don't actually know where you are because you can't accurately, I'm guessing, read the depth in the middle of a storm. You can't see where you are.
Right. So by this point, the Anderson is sort of trailing the Fitzgerald. So the Fitzgerald is ahead of them and they're following. Because the winds are moving towards the east, the Anderson is going to start to get the waves that are headed for the Fitzgerald and see them before the Fitzgerald does. At 3:30 p.m., this is on the 10th, Captain McSorley says, Anderson, this is the Fitzgerald. I've sustained some topside damage. I have a fence rail laid down, 2 vents lost or damaged, and a list. So what that means is that at some point between 3:15 and 3:30, they started taking on water. So that's why people think that perhaps it was at Caribou Island that they may have started to take on that list. And that just basically means that they are leaning down in the water. So one side of the ship, if you're looking at it head on, one side is leaning down into the water. And you really don't want that because you want as much clearance between the top of the ship and the water as possible. And you guys were asking earlier, like, how does it affect a ship to be a little overloaded? Well, it just makes it sit lower in the water. And so if you can imagine,
so it's easier for things to crash over the top.
Exactly. And then get down into things, especially if there's anything accumulating on the top of the ship or if the temperatures start to plummet and it starts to ice over, which it did. So it's looking a little rough now. By this point, effectively, they are starting to sink. So he says to the captain of the Anderson, will you stay by me till I get to Whitefish? So then the captain of the Anderson said, I've got it. Do you have your pumps going? And McSorley said, yes, both of them. Then at 4:10, so this is about 40 minutes after that, Fitzgerald radioed the Anderson and asked for radar assistance for the remainder of the voyage because now their radar has gone out. So he says, I've lost both radars. Can you provide me with radar plots till we reach Whitefish Bay? Again, this is an experienced captain, to his credit, like he's doing what he can. He knows that there's a ship that's just a little bit behind him, which I'm sure was very reassuring. And then the captain of the Anderson replies, we got that. We'll keep you advised of position. From 4:30 to 5 o'clock p.m., they called for any vessel in Whitefish Point to send them information about the lighthouse at Whitefish Point, and then they received an answer that the beacon and the light were not operating. So the lighthouse was down at Whitefish Point.
Oops.
Did they mention that in the song?
No.
Both their long and short radar are gone. They are starting to take on water. They have a list. I believe it's a starboard list. So that means on the right side. They're starting to lean. And they already don't have a ton of extra clearance because they're sitting a little bit lower because they're carrying a little bit of extra load. They've lost a railing. They also just found out that the lighthouse that they're going to be looking for to guide them in, basically the only thing that they have outside of like maps at this point, the lighthouse and the beacon are not operating. They're down. I believe there was a power outage. So then between 5:30 and 6 o'clock p.m., there was another ship that radioed the Fitzgerald and said, the wind is really howling down here. What are the conditions where you are? And the Fitz replies, it says, undiscernible shouts heard by the ship. And whoever was on the Fitz yelled, don't let nobody on deck.
Oh, man.
And then the Fitzgerald said, I have a bad list, lost both radars. I'm taking heavy seas over the deck, one of the worst seas I've ever been in. And then the other ship replied, if I'm correct, you have 2 radars. And the Fitzgerald, I feel like I can hear how Captain McSorley would have said this. He's like, they're both gone. Like, it's like, but you have 2. Yes. That's what I'm saying. They're both gone.
To.
Yeah. Ugh, it's really sad to hear how much it took a downward turn so fast, too. Because it's only been a few hours since things were relatively okay.
Yeah.
And the next thing that basically happens in the timeline, which is right around 7 p.m., the Anderson, behind the Fitzgerald, was struck by 2 huge rogue waves. So waves that kind of come out of nowhere. You might have heard of them on the ocean, but they kind of just build, and they're very, very dangerous. On Lake Superior, they often come in 3s or 4s, and you could have 3 or 4 in an hour and then none the rest of the day, but they often accompany each other. They call them the 3 sisters. So the Anderson is struck by 2, possibly 3, of those big waves that put water on the ship, 35 feet above the waterline. And they know, because of that those waves are also headed for the Fitzgerald.
And did they radio the Fitzgerald to let him know?
Well, at 7:10 p.m., there's another radio transmission between Anderson and the Fitzgerald. They ask, how are you making out with your problem?
We're doing great. Nobody go on deck. Everything's so totally fine. Again, we have no radar. Hey, get down.
But it's fair to say, like, Captain McSorley and his crew probably know there is a problem.
Well, remember,
things are serious.
Remember, a little while ago, he said, one of the worst seas I've ever been in. They chose to wait basically for the Anderson to catch up to them to guide them into Whitefish. They basically have to wait. They can't do anything because they don't have the radar to go into shore. And it's snowing at this point. So they don't have visibility. They don't have anything but paper maps at this point. There's literally nothing they can do.
They are not far removed from like the way a 19th century ship would navigate.
Not really, no.
Yeah,
So,
I mean-
but the good news is, again, the Anderson is about 10 miles behind them and they'll catch up. So they choose to wait.
They do have a radio, and that is
Yes.
key. So like
Yes.
without that, they would be just totally...
Completely blind.
Exactly.
Lost in the,
So that's where it's interesting where it says the searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they put 15 more miles behind her. The reason they didn't is because they stopped to be guided in. Because, and again, mind you, there's no lighthouse.
Yeah.
So there's nothing.
Would you say that line, that's not coming out of nowhere? He's pulling that from something.
Well, they were so close to Whitefish Bay where they sank. I mean, it really is
It has
very,
a
very
feeling like
close.
they
almost made it. Yep. One thing I guess that to me stood out about this shipwreck, there were so many different things going poorly.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's why people today still debate how she sank and what eventually pushed it over the edge and things like that. And the truth is, it was always a combination of a lot of different factors and the culmination of a lot of different decisions, none of which on the captain's part sound like they were wrong at all. But ultimately, all together, in a perfect storm, at a really bad time, with no navigation, eventually ended in tragedy. Even imagining that water coming over the top of the ship, which has already got a pretty big starboard list, it's already actively sinking, all of their navigation systems are out, the lighthouse that they're looking for is gone, there's ice forming on the deck of their ship, they're already farther underwater than they want to be, and the waves are coming in completely unpredictable patterns, and the Fitzgerald is being tossed around by 35-foot waves in water that's actually not even as deep as it is long. The Fitzgerald is over 700 feet long. The water that it's in is about 500 feet deep. So just imagine that as those waves are taking up one end of this ship, they're putting it at such an angle that you could literally hit the bottom of the ship on the bottom of the lake going up one of those waves. One of the guys who was doing an interview said that he had been on a ship in seas similar to that, and he wound up getting like massively injured because something landed on top of him. It's dangerous even if you don't sink. Being in seas like that is just, well, lakes like that is very dangerous. I guess I should say waters. Maybe I should just say waters.
Safe.
I keep wanting to say seas.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, it's
basically
these guys are talking about, they say seas are coming in. I think in its nautical sense, seas just means what you're sailing on.
I won't feel comfortable about that until I'm able to talk to at least 5 men in a YouTube comment section who have sailed for 50 plus years.
So, fellas, get in the comments.
Tell me what terminology I'm using incorrectly. I want to learn.
We are a bunch of
Landlubbers.
Yeah.
So show us the ropes
Yep. See?
nicely, respectfully, but in a way that will algorithmically drive up our engagement.
And that's all. It's not too much to ask.
Yeah.
So Anderson is checked in with the Fitzgerald. He tells them basically something that they're going to need to clear ahead of them. And Fitzgerald replies, well, am I going to clear? And Anderson says, yes, he's going to pass to the west of you. Fitzgerald says, well, fine. And Anderson says, well, by the way, Fitzgerald, how are you making out with your problem? Fitzgerald says, we are holding our own.
This is such a Minnesotan conversation.
It really is.
How are you making out
We're
with
fine.
your problem? We're fine. And as we all know, fine means, oh no, we're in
oh, no.
trouble.
They're at the bottom of the lake already.
Yeah.
This is last.
Yeah, but those are the famous kind of last words of the Fitzgerald. But Anderson says, okay, fine, I'll be talking to you later, which if that's not a Minnesota goodbye.
No, a Minnesota goodbye would go on for an hour and a half.
Well, we'll talk to you later there. Oh, all right.
So that was at 7:10, and sometime between 7:20 and 7:30 is kind of the estimated time period when the ship sank. At 7:15, they would have entered a squall, and it obscured the ship from radar observation. It's like there's a curtain that goes down over the Fitzgerald. That is normal when it's in a squall for it to disappear for a little bit. And at 7:20, that's when they disappear from the radar, and the Anderson calls the Coast Guard right away.
Got it.
At 7:55, the Anderson called again to tell the Coast Guard that they had lost the Fitzgerald visually and on radar. And by 9 p.m., the Coast Guard had no available search ships. Again, this is a big storm. And they radioed the Anderson and asked for assistance. And then the Coast Guard requests that they return to the site that the Fitzgerald was lost and search for survivors. And the Anderson, having just made it through that storm that they pretty much unequivocally know sank the Fitzgerald, the captain of that ship said that he thought about his own family and if his sons were out there, and he took his crew back into the storm to go and see if they could find survivors, which is kind of, I think that's one of the most heartwarming parts of the story that you can kind of take away from it. Given 35-foot waves and the temperature of the water and the fact that this was almost 2 hours after they'd lost contact with the ship and they knew that it had probably gone down, there was not really a chance of finding anyone alive. And they still went. And it was still storming. They just made it out alive, and they knew that it had taken down a ship, and they still decided to just voluntarily go right back into it and just see.
And that's the crazy thing about rescue ships in general is, by definition, they're often going out into conditions that you normally should never go into.
Right.
Because those conditions are sinking ships, and yet they're going out into them.
There's, I think, a camaraderie on water of
Right.
Yeah, they mentioned that. They said, like, well, that's just kind of the code that you have out there, that you will go back and look.
If you were in the Edmund Fitzgerald's position, it's what you would hope the other ships are doing.
Yeah,
so you
exactly.
return the favor.
And it seems like a lot of times that is what other ships do.
Yeah.
So props to sailors.
Yeah. I do have a newfound, like, high level of respect. Not that I disrespected sailors before, but I guess
You were
I had-
always spitting on them.
I was always just really down on the sailors. But no, but I genuinely just hadn't really thought about it that much, I guess. I don't know how to describe it other than that for a lot of these people, being a sailor seems like a lifestyle or a family inheritance kind of thing. And it's like a culture that they grew up in, and they really do have kind of a love for it that is real. Like it's based in that sort of risk, and it's based in the camaraderie that they found.
There's a similar thing to what you get with soldiers or firefighters, or like there are various jobs that are by their nature going to assume a certain amount of risk, but are absolutely essential jobs.
Yeah.
And so there's an element of sacrifice. Like obviously you hope to come home, but everyone who signs up for that knows this is a possibility, and that's part of what they're taking on. And so it then gives their deaths a sort of meaning beyond just a tragic accident.
Right. You know, you can talk about the economic things that put them in that position, the companies that were encouraging sailing in dangerous conditions, all of that. And I think those are important things. But I think what I'll remember most about researching this, and I think what has kind of made a big impact with me, is the idea of the Anderson going straight back out into the storm that they just basically barely escaped from to look for survivors they knew they wouldn't find.
Yeah.
Because that's just kind of the agreement that they all had with each other. So, as you may have probably guessed, they did not find any survivors. All 29 crew members almost certainly went down with the ship. It sunk officially in Canadian waters, so the Canadian government at this point has declared it a grave site, and so it is basically prohibitively difficult to dive there. They did place a memorial plaque down there, and to this day, as they say in the song, is it the musty old, what is it?
In a musty old hall in Detroit, they prayed, a maritime sailor's cathedral.
Yes, so that is
a real place,
place. And allegedly Gordon Lightfoot went there, and the clergy member who showed him around looked at him and said, "It's not musty at all in here, is it?" And it's not. It's filled with beautiful stained glass.
You want a maritime sailor's cathedral to be musty.
Yes, but he fixed it. So in subsequent performances, he always said a rustic old cathedral.
That's...
Yes. It's a little less atmospheric, but I suppose it's
Herman
respectful.
Melville.
Yes, but it is respectful. It
is. I appreciate that respect.
He also changed. So there was, unfortunately, and this is like a really upsetting part of it, the company basically tried to blame the sinking on the hatch covers not being put down.
Hence the line about the main hatchway going in.
Yes. And so because of that, they wound up paying, I think, like about $600 to each family of the crew members. So it's like a pittance that they were given, and it's really upsetting. There's a lot of debate over it. It was a combination of things, but the idea that it was the fault of the crew members or the captain, I think, is largely kind of disproven. The unfortunate thing is that did not seem to stop the insurance companies from not paying what they should have.
Color me completely shocked and surprised.
Yeah, exactly. So back to Gordon Lightfoot, one of the, I think, mothers of one of the people whose responsibility it would have been to close those hatchways. She complained about that lyric because she thought it made it sound like it was his fault that it had gone down, so he changed it.
That's nice.
Changed his lyrics
I'm
later
getting
on.
a lot of respect for Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah,
here.
in his live performances, they did not change the original record.
It's an interesting thing because, like, that song did so much to
Publicize.
highlight this tragedy and really kind of spin it in mythical terms and embed it in the culture. And if you go to any site along the Great Lakes that has a sort of gift shop, there's going to be Edmund Fitzgerald memorabilia. And there's an interesting debate to be had of, like, when does it cross the line from honoring to sort of cheap commercialization? Like, when are you actually dishonoring it by making money off this? But it seems like Gordon Lightfoot's intention was always really just to actually honor these people who died.
And it seems like, from everything that I read, it seems like the song is really embraced by the families of the crew that was lost. I think if you lose a loved one, you really want them to be remembered. And you want to know that, you almost want to know that, like, the world is aware of what happened. And so these people got that in a really unique way. And I think it sounds like that has been of at least a little bit of comfort to them. But the good news is, too, that you were going to read some of the things that have gone into effect since the wreck of the Fitzgerald, because thank goodness accidents on Lake Superior and shipwrecks on Lake Superior have very much decreased.
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been a major sinking since.
Which is very notable when you look at the history of shipping. And, you know, there was an era when there were shipwrecks every year. It was just a thing that happened.
Or one year where there were many shipwrecks.
Yeah, so some of that, obviously, technology helps, but it also is just learning lessons the hard way. So some of the things that have changed since then as a direct result of the investigation. So the Coast Guard and other organizations did their own investigations into the causes and came up with long lists of recommendations for ways to make future trips safer. And not all of them were implemented, but some were. So, for example, in 1977, the Coast Guard started requiring the use of depth finders by all vessels of over 1,600 gross registered tons. Since 1980, survival suits have been required aboard ship in each crew quarters as the customer is stationed with strobe lights affixed to life jackets and survival suits.
That is something that would have been extremely valuable on the Fitzgerald, because it's not just a matter of surviving the wreck.
It's surviving the water.
It's surviving the water. When I say the Anderson was not expecting to find survivors, it's because the water was so cold and treacherous.
So the survival suit's basically like a spacesuit for keeping the cold water out.
Exactly.
Cold water.
Yep.
I genuinely don't think I would survive a shipwreck in Lake Superior in the summer on a sunny day.
I've been actually swimming in Lake Superior in August, and I had numbness in my fingers for an hour. Yeah. So the survival suits, for sure, that's like pretty direct outcome, which is good.
In 1980, they implemented what was called a LORAN-C positioning system, which was kind of an early navigation system using different networks of radio things before they switched to GPS. So ships have much better way of knowing where they are. Emergency position indicating radio beacons are installed on all Great Lakes vessels for immediate and accurate location. Navigational charts for northeastern Lake Superior were improved for accuracy and greater detail. There's like timetables for like how often you need to revise them, like understanding that lakes change. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration revised its method for predicting wave heights. The Coast Guard rescinded the 1973 load line regulation that had permitted them to reduce freeboard loadings. I have no idea what that means, but it sounds significant. And the Coast Guard also began annual pre-November inspections. Coast Guard inspectors now board all U.S. ships during the fall to inspect the hatch and vent closures. So right before storm season comes in, they get an extra once over. So all of these things have likely contributed to lives being saved. So in closing, we discussed a little bit at the end about the long memory of this wreck. It seems that one of the most touching things is the way that many people have tried to actually keep the focus on the lives that were lost. It is a tragedy that is still in living memory. There are direct descendants all around today. And so perhaps we should close by reading the names of the people there.
Michael Armagost,
Frederick Beecher,
Thomas Benson,
Edward Binden,
Thomas Borgeson,
Oliver Champeau,
Nolan Church,
Ransom Cundy,
Thomas Edwards,
Russell Haskell,
George Hull,
Bruce Hudson,
Alan Kelman,
Gordon McClellan,
Joseph Mazes,
John McCarthy,
Ernest McSorley,
Eugene O'Brien,
Carl Peckel,
John Poviach,
James Pratt,
Robert Rafferty,
Paul Ripa,
John Simmons,
William Spengler,
Mark Thomas,
Ralph Walton,
David Weiss,
Blaine Wilhelm.
May they all rest in peace in their ice water mansion. As we mentioned, this was the last time to date that a major ship has gone down on the Great Lakes, but there is a long history of shipwrecks in Lake Superior and on the rest of the Great Lakes. And next week, we're going to be looking at a storm that to residents of Minnesota's North Shore was long remembered as the storm of the century. And this occurred in 1905 and was responsible, this one storm, for sinking 29 ships. If you like shipwrecks, we have got the show for you. Tune in next week. Be sure to subscribe. But otherwise, thank you for listening.
And that's it for this episode. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into Minnesota's storied past. You can find detailed show notes for this and all episodes at minnesotaunknown.com/podcast. We'll post a link there to each episode, along with features such as accompanying images, links to more info, and a list of our sources cited. If you have questions, comments, corrections, complaints, or compliments, or would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, please email us at info@minnesotaunknown.com. We'd truly love to hear from you. You can find Minnesota Unknown wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss an episode. And if you have a moment to rate and review, that would really help others find us. We also give history walking tours in and around the Twin Cities. To learn about our current and upcoming tours, head to minnesotaunknown.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Just look for Minnesota Unknown. Minnesota Unknown is produced, hosted, written, and researched by Hannah Norton, Josie Bergman, and myself, Alec Weston. This episode was edited by me. Our theme song is by Union Shakedown. This episode is copyright 2025 by Minnesota Unknown, LLC. All rights reserved.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa down of the big lake they call Gitchigumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. No, it wasn't. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and good captain well seasoned.
If we sing the whole song, that will run afoul of copyright. But actually, if we sing
If we sing it
might
bad
be
enough.
bad enough.
If we sing it, they won't be able to tell what song it is.